So good morning. Thanks so much for coming to this Leeds Digital Festival webinar on IP in the metaverse. The session is going to last about 45 minutes, with the final 5 to 10 hopefully set aside for questions. You can ask the questions at any time, and they'll go into the Q&A function, and then we can pick them up at the end. And if we run out of time, then after the session, we'll try and pick them up, provided they're asked not anonymously. We're also recording the webinar, and that, together with the transcript, will go on our website afterwards, and the slides will be sent out. To explain who I am, my name's Charlie Bond. I'm a Principal Associate in the Gowling WLG IP team. My practice spans all IP rights, but generally I focus a bit more on the brand side of things.
Hi, I'm Lucy. Lucy Singer. I'm also an associate in the IP team. I've worked across a number of IP rights also, but I'm currently honing in on the world of brands and advertising.
So this is what we're going to cover today. We're going to start with terminology. You're probably aware there's lots of jargon associated with the metaverse, so we're going to go through some of the basics of that. Some of you will be familiar with the words that we're going to cover, others won't, but the intention is that then we're all on a level playing field for the later discussions. Then we're going to talk about how the metaverse has developed. So we'll move on to talking about conceptually what the metaverse is, because that's quite important. Then we'll look at how it will or may work, as well as where it has or indeed has not actually got to. And then we're going to finish up looking at IP rights in the metaverse, taking a high-level look at the different IP rights, and then, because it's the most important really at the moment, we'll look at what brand owners need to be thinking about to ensure they're protecting and enforcing their rights within the metaverse. So without further ado, we shall board this Gowling WLG Leeds Digital Festival spaceship and launch ourselves into the metaverse.
Thank you, Charlie. So as Charlie briefly touched upon there are a lot of buzzwords which concern the metaverse, and we're just going to spend a few minutes kind of clarifying some of the main terms. So blockchain. Blockchain is hopefully a bit more familiar by now. In essence, blockchain is a technology that permanently records transactions, and it does so in a public database known as a ledger. The technology allows the same data to be stored globally on thousands of computers without the need of a trusted authority or a central server. Any network user is then able to see all the entries that appear at any time in a public blockchain, though obviously certain blockchains can be private. Blockchain technology is therefore really useful because it's a proven and robust method of tracking anything involving transactions or ownership. The core aspect of blockchain is therefore the decentralization of it, resulting in the fact that there's no vulnerable point of control, which makes the network really difficult to gain control of or easy to fool. So as we might discuss later, the metaverse won't be built by a single company, well, in its ideal form, but is instead conceived via multiple networks. The decentralization aspect of blockchain therefore makes it really vital in allowing the proof of ownership across these numerous worlds. Users without it would have little incentive to purchase digital assets, and so blockchain will, if it goes forward, play a central role in enabling the metaverse to become a reality. In a similar vein, cryptocurrency. So cryptocurrency is the implementation of blockchain for the purposes of currency, using the technology to track transactions made in the currency. The currency therefore takes advantage of the decentralization and transparency of the blockchain. It's perhaps more of the famous or lucrative or ruinous forms of blockchain you might have heard of, depending on your perspective. The most well-known of these is obviously Bitcoin, but now there are innumerable others. It's speculated that cryptocurrencies will be used widely across the metaverse for the same reasons as blockchain. So their decentralization enables consistency across the different worlds, and their security makes them ideal for the job. There are obviously numerous cryptocurrencies, as I just touched upon, some more volatile, some more legitimate. So it's entirely possible that we might see the rise of a kind of single cryptocurrency to manage the metaverse.
So NFTs. NFT stands for non-fungible token. An NFT is it's a digital token that's transferable between two people, but unlike other digital assets, they're not interchangeable. So you need to think of them as sort of crypto Picassos rather than crypto pounds. But like cryptocurrency, each NFT it's issued or minted, and its ownership is tracked and verified using blockchain. So NFTs are essentially just metadata files that refer to digital version of a particular work of art or any other asset, which is then stored on a blockchain. Lots of people think that they might provide the bridge between real and virtual property and allow people to prove ownership of a virtual good, which they can then use to display on, for example, their digital avatar in the metaverse. We're going to come on to avatars in a second. NFTs also do create scarcity in the digital world, as they, by definition, can't be duplicated. But it is worth noting that the asset underlying an NFT certainly can. I'm sure lots of you have seen loads of headlines about how much an NFT can fetch on the open market. In 2021, so a couple of years ago now, Damien Hirst made some artworks in both NFT and physical form, and buyers had to choose which one they wanted. And then the other was destroyed. So there's lots of skepticism about the value of some NFTs, but that did represent creating true value because you ended up with a genuinely unique artwork at the end of it. So NFTs, they're not a perfect solution to ownership of goods. People think that transferring an NFT will also transfer ownership of the underlying artwork, but that's not necessarily the case. All an NFT is a unit of data stored on a blockchain. It's an on-chain asset in the metaverse, different from an off-chain asset in the real world. There's no legal basis to say that transferring the on-chain asset also then transfers the legal rights to the underlying off-chain asset. Instead, whether legal ownership is transferred is basically dictated by what is contained in the written T's and C's of the party that made the NFT, which itself only works if that person actually had the necessary rights to the underlying artwork in the first place. So you need a contract that describes exactly what the legal effects of transferring the NFT is. And a good example of this is the CryptoPunks NFTs, which are on the slide. They attempted to retroactively add copyright licenses, having already sold tons of artworks in NFT form. You can't really do that, and it illustrates a real problem with people just firing out NFTs without actually thinking about the underlying legal issues and what they're transferring.
So now just moving on to avatars. An avatar is a manifestation of a user within the metaverse. As you can see from the pictures on the right, think more this delightful and not remotely frightening image of Mark Zuckerberg, and not the species from James Cameron's 3D films. So it's the personalization of these avatars which commentators believe will drive the consumer spending within the metaverse. Microtransactions within the metaverse would likely center around the kind of provisions of goods and services for avatars. So we're already seeing numerous brands take part in this. Nike, Vans, and Ralph Lauren all created Roblox experiences, offering the ability to purchase digital clothing and different assets and accessories, which you can then put on your avatar. Obviously, in some respects, this is a bit of an easy win for fashion brands because they don't need to create the physical versions for consumers to purchase them.
So AR versus VR. AR and VR are both obviously really important acronyms when it comes to the metaverse, but they're often used wrongly or interchangeably when they're actually completely different. AR stands for augmented reality, and that's where users interact with the real world in some form. So there are lots of popular AR games and platforms because the technological needs for people to use AR are much less than they are for VR. So I'm sure lots of us play Pokemon Go. That's a game where people can, all they need is their phone, and it doesn't require any extra technology. All you do is flick on the AR feature, which superimposes your interactions with Pokemon onto the real world via the camera on your phone. So if I'm walking up to a post box and I hold up my phone and with the AR function on, there might be a Pokemon hiding behind that post box. And it made the news for the wrong reasons when they launched Pokemon Go, because you might remember people were chasing Pokemon into the road through just looking at their phones and not looking at what was going on around them, which is a thing the developers then had to fix quite quickly. VR, that stands for virtual reality. VR is how the metaverse is more being framed, so users exist in an entirely created, fantastical video game style world, and that's limited, but it's limited by headsets and the sort of hardware you need to use it, which is still at a reasonably basic stage with lower than expected uptake really as well. That's despite the fact that the current generation of VR headsets have been around for about a decade now, but maybe things like Apple's Vision headset, which is coming soon, which implements AR technology as well as VR, will change things, but we're probably skeptical about whether it will.
So now we're going to move on and discuss what the metaverse is now and what it might be later. So just moving into the concept phase and perhaps its more current state. The first reference to the metaverse was in the cyberpunk book Snow Crash by Neil Stephenson. The idea being that it was an alternate immersive 3D reality where your life could be duplicated in a digital universe. Facebook, now Meta, then brought it into the public lexicon in 2021 when they pitched their idea of this interrelatable, interactive metaverse where you could socialize free of constraints of the physical world. The metaverse is a concept there, and therefore Meta's vision is defined by kind of two main features. So the first being that it doesn't identify a single virtual space, but it's decentralized across various platforms and accessible throughout them. The second is that it exists in parallel to our current world. So there's an interactable version with our physical lives. As Charlie just touched upon, nothing like this currently exists. And even if it were to exist, it's quite interesting to think about some of the legal challenges such a position would pose. So if you think about how it works in terms of going across numerous platforms, currently we have a separate contract with each of the platforms we log on to and use as users. If there's one massive metaverse, who do we sign the contract with? How will the various platforms with both big players and small players counteract? And when you think of some of those big characters that are currently in the technology space, I'm thinking the kind of Elon Musks of this world, it's interesting to see how that might play out. So in the reality, as we speak now, the current existence of the metaverse is perhaps much more common in gaming. So currently we've got games like Decentraland and the Sandbox. And at their core, these are quite basic traditional board video games with blockchain technology underlying them. So for instance, they might have background systems where users can vote for and against updates. There might be virtual currency, there might be virtual ownership. But really, what distinguishes these kind of games from the metaverse as it was envisaged by Meta? If it's the social element, games like that have existed for decades. Back in my day, it was Habbo Hotel, if we have any fans in the room. If it's the blockchain element, again, games have existed with virtual currencies for decades also. Also, these games in their current form have no connection at the moment with the real world. And as Charlie just touched upon then, the kind of physical hardware we need doesn't yet really exist. So if we're talking about connected headsets, they obviously need very powerful computers to be connected to, which is quite clunky. And the more wireless headsets that we see available on the market at the moment have their own issues with kind of tracking delays and range of motion.
Also, now looking at the future of the metaverse and starting by looking at its rise. So when it first launched, obviously there was lots of attention and investment in the metaverse, and it's easy now to be skeptical, but ultimately still people aren't suggesting that the metaverse exists now in its complete anticipated form. There's been tons of investment. Facebook obviously changed its name to Meta in 2021 and spent about 10 billion acquiring different metaverse-oriented VR software and hardware. Lots of places have made estimates about what they think the worth of the metaverse market will be. So we've got Bloomberg said 800 billion by next year, JP Morgan 1 trillion, Goldman Sachs 8 trillion, and a study earlier this year thought it would be, by New McKinsey, would be worth 5 trillion by 2030. That spectrum sort of indicates how in the dark we really are about where everything is now and where it's going to go. There has been strides in VR technology because of the investment in the metaverse. Meta launched its Project Cambria headset last year, which can track your face and eye movements and then can be mapped onto your digital avatar. The barrier there being the price, which was $1,500 at launch. And then this month, Apple have announced it's going to launch its Apple Vision Pro headset next year in the US, which will specifically be tailored for the metaverse ecosystem, they say, which again will retail at an eye-watering $3,500. On the consumer side, trade in virtual metaverse goods and even real estate is already long established. Looking at real estate, every realm which describes itself as a digital real estate company said in 2022 it purchased about $4.3 million of digital real estate in the Sandbox. Looking at marketplaces, Decentraland similarly has its own marketplace where users can buy and sell virtual items as well as real estate. big brands like Samsung, Adidas, PwC, Miller Lite, they've all shown willingness to purchase land in decentral land. Gucci did something novel. They had a virtual Gucci garden space on Roblox and then opened a physical space that matched it at the same time. So you could have a sort of, or they call it an immersive multimedia experience where you went between the metaverse and the real world. And then events and concerts. Sotheby's have hosted an auction. There have been concerts by people like deadmau5 and Grimes, and then fashion events by big brands like Dolce & Gabbana, Tommy Hilfiger, Estee Lauder, all hosted on these platforms. So the flip side on the future, despite all the positive things we've just talked about that have happened, you've probably noticed that the metaverse has taken quite a few hits, particularly this year. Microsoft shut its virtual workspace platform, AltSpace VR, in January. They let go of 100 members of their metaverse team and made a lot of cuts to their HoloLens headset team. All in March, Disney shut its metaverse division. Walmart ended its Roblox metaverse projects, and Meta declared they were going to focus much more on AI and building that into every one of their products. Just mentioning AI, we're not going to go into detail on it because it's a whole other topic in itself. I'm sure lots of you have attended entire talks at this festival on AI, but obviously it does have a relevance to the metaverse and essentially will just amplify the issues that we're already talking about anyway. So on balance, even if the metaverse has experienced a few setbacks lately and it doesn't exist as people thought it might at this point, there is still a push to progress and accelerated progress. People are familiar with the new principles that underlie the commerce in the metaverse because, as Lucy said, they've been around for years and the technology is getting there. What remains not there is the underlying system that joins all the elements together into one seamless global metaverse package.
So we're now just going to quickly discuss some of the pros and cons of the metaverse as envisaged. I will be your bearer of good news and discuss some of the positives. So in terms of social, obviously currently interaction online is generally on social media or video chats, which are 2D. The metaverse envisages a kind of situation where you could, for instance, take your other half on a date to the cinema without leaving the house, or you could have your friends around for a virtual takeaway. I don't know what that would consist of, in a virtual replica of your living room. In terms of businesses, obviously virtual office platforms could simulate the office environment with meetings seemingly face-to-face. In a post-COVID world, this offers quite an interesting perspective. Retail outlets, obviously, as we'll touch upon later, have a big interaction with the metaverse. So avatars could browse high street shops and purchase both virtually in the digital world and then have the physical counterparts sent home. In terms of brands and advertising, just as in the physical world, the metaverse could provide a real myriad of opportunities. So from the branded clothes that avatars could be wearing to kind of virtual billboards that you might see. Speaking of real estate, virtual tours are kind of already taking place, as you might see on real estate companies. Excuse me, sorry. But the metaverse could allow this to take a whole new level. So imagine kind of touring around a potential purchase that you wanted to look at. You could stroll down the local high street, you could sit in the garden. It obviously enables a whole load of possibilities. And finally, education and tourism. So obviously restrictions wouldn't occur in the metaverse. So theoretically, you could visit a digital replica of anywhere from anywhere. So for example, you could take a trip to ancient Mayan ruins in Mexico, or in terms of schooling, could walk across a volcanic lava field, all while sitting in your classroom or your bedroom.
So, turning to the pitfalls, it could be argued that not only do lots of the elements of the metaverse already exist, and often in more than a basic form, lots of these don't require a unified, persistent metaverse as people envisioned and as Robo Zuckerberg thinks. At their core, discrete experiences like touring a house in VR, visiting a VR theme park, having a virtual business meeting, they don't need a persistent avatar economy to work. They work independently and they're already widely adopted without the metaverse label or any persistency, but they're not yet widely adopted as one single package. Proponents of the metaverse think that's simply because VR technology has not been widely adopted, rather than actually looking at whether there is a lack of demand for it. The other issues on the slide that we'll go through. So privacy, obviously there are existing concerns surrounding privacy and tracking online, and they're only going to be made worse by the metaverse. As technology becomes more sophisticated, so too do opportunities for marketers and advertisers to take advantage. Think of in-headset eye tracking that allows marketers to see what you're looking at in the metaverse and for how long. And the same goes for sort of wearable haptic feedback devices where they can track our physical reactions to what we're looking at in the metaverse and use that in what they're doing. Looking at child protection, obviously lots of existing challenges for parents around child safety and monitoring online, only made worse and stakes raised higher with online interactions when they're becoming more personal, more immersive. Health concerns, internet and gaming addictions, they're already recognised as disorders by the WHO, and as virtual experiences become more immersive again, it's likely that more people will struggle with this. There's already a thing called post-VR sadness, which can be brought on when you go from the fantastical virtual world back into the dour real world. There's access inequality, which we've touched on already. VR technology is very expensive and requires reliable and strong connectivity. And that's going to preclude lots of people from accessing the metaverse, particularly in the third world. Although it's an existing issue with the internet in general, there is a big leap in technological sophistication from straightforward online access to VR access. There's desensitization, so immersive VR experiences feel very real and can lead to a general desensitization to violence and other antisocial behaviors, similar to how video games have had that effect as well. Lastly, identity hacking and theft. So as the line between our digital and physical identity blurs, there's obviously a bigger risk posed by identity thieves, as well as the means of deception that are available to them. For example, the opportunities the metaverse presents to today's phone scammers who can replicate the appearance and voice of a relative.
So we're now going to come to discuss IP in the metaverse, which is obviously mine and Charlie's favourite part of the talk, being IP lawyers. So we're just going to quickly cover some of the kind of other IP rights before we dive more thoroughly into brands. So given the lack of technical development in the metaverse, brands-related IP rights are really of the most relevance currently, for the time being at least. However, before we go on, we're just going to touch upon the other rights. So copyright. Copyright is an automatic right in the UK. So if you create something that qualifies for copyright protection, then the rights automatically exist without the need for any sort of registration. Undoubtedly, computer programs are needed in order to create the virtual reality we're discussing and to implement them. The fact that these computer programs are designed to run the metaverse is kind of inconsequential as far as copyright is concerned. The same basic underlying principle applies to all computer programs. So the underlying code is protected by copyright, as well as certain visual aspects of their kind of user interface that you might see in the metaverse. Fundamentally, copyright protection is dependent upon whether a work is made by a qualifying person or whether it's published in a qualifying country. This begs the question, which we're actually going to touch upon in relation to trademarks later, about how the courts will interpret the scope and validity of copyright works within the metaverse, which has no boundaries. So where is the geographical location for the purposes of copyright? Just quickly touching upon patents, as we've already discussed, creating the reality of the metaverse will require significant technological developments, and more often than not, that requires patent protection. As we've already discussed, last month saw the premiere of Apple's Vision Pro. Those headsets have already had over 5,000 patent applications filed for them. So just a kind of quick glance into what one piece of technology requires in terms of patents. Beyond this, tech owners might be relying on kind of copyright protection and trade secrets to do most of the heavy lifting. So as you might be aware, many patent offices, including the EU IPO, exclude software from patentability because it's an illegible subject matter. So that therefore makes kind of copyright, which I just discussed, a much more important factor in this space. Finally, just touching upon trade secrets. So in light of the challenges that patents face for kind of registration and the enforcement of patents, businesses might be better off using these kind of trade secrets to protect their IP in the metaverse. So trade secrets protect commercially valuable confidential information and gives the owner this kind of competitive advantage if it treats it as a secret. Fundamentally, trade secrets can last indefinitely if the secret is kept confidentially. and out of the public domain. So that could also be a useful tool for IP owners within the metaverse. So now coming on to brand protection in the metaverse. As we've touched upon, the brand it's clear that a number of brands are already being really proactive in the metaverse. So we've got an example here of Ticketmaster partnering with NFL. They produced actually game tickets in the form of NFTs, which is quite interesting. And as part of that process, they filed a number of trademark applications. Vanity Fair launched an online digital art exhibition known as Meta Vanity, and also filed numerous trademark applications for the transmission of this kind of video experience. Nike also has prioritized staking its position in the metaverse. So they've filed a number of trademark applications for virtual goods, as well as launching a virtual store known as Nikeland, which has apparently attracted almost 7 million customers.
So given the extent of metaverse already trademark activity we're already seeing, that begs the question, where is the metaverse for trademark purposes? Much like the internet, the metaverse exists outside of geographical boundaries. So that raises the issue for brand owners when they're looking to enforce their trademark rights against people that are infringing them. The positive news is that you don't really need to drastically change your existing strategies for online infringement. You just need to keep focusing on key jurisdictions and markets. But the protection offered by a trademark is obviously geographically restricted to wherever you've registered. So brands need to register their trademarks in jurisdictions where they want the protection. It may seem obvious to say, but a mark registered in the US will not provide protection against what would otherwise be an infringement in the UK. So that leads to the next question. When a trademark is used in the metaverse, where in the physical world is it then being used? And so what court has jurisdiction on the dispute? In 2007 in the US, it was looked at to an extent in a case where a user of the virtual world Second Life brought an action against the operator saying they'd unlawfully confiscated his virtual property when they suspended his account. In looking at whether it had jurisdiction, the court looked at the way Second Life was marketed and decided it had been acted unlawfully because the game was marketed to induce people throughout the US to purchase virtual property within the platform. So that indicates the courts are willing to find jurisdiction in trademark infringement actions purely based on the fact that the virtual world was marketed in a way that partially targeted any given jurisdiction. A more recent case, and in fact the only decision we have so far on trademark infringement with NFTs is Hermes against Rothschild, which we're going to go into more detail later. But in short, Hermes brought litigation in New York City based on the basis that Rothschild were offering NFTs on the online marketplace OpenSea, which is a Delaware company, but with its main point of principle being New York. Rothschild had customers purchasing NFTs in New York, and Rothschild therefore were causing harm to Hermes in their principal place of business being New York. Some people have said that the answer to the issue around all of this is to create a new meta jurisdiction with rules that can be enforced by any stakeholder and not just within individual jurisdictions. But as probably we all know, legislative change is slow at the best of times, let alone when it involves collaboration between lots of jurisdictions. So whilst the metaverse remains very much a work in progress, it's pretty unlikely the governments are going to get ahead of it and legislate to deal with these sorts of things in advance. So now, looking at trademark registration for virtual goods, there's some quite interesting questions that have been raised by the metaverse on the topic of trademark registration. When you're registering a trademark, obviously you have to specify which categories of use the registration should protect using the NIST classification system, which is used pretty much around the world. At the moment, pretty much the only category of thing we've talked about so far today that's mentioned is in Class 9, which talks about downloadable digital files authenticated by NFTs. That's not stopped trademark offices all over the place receiving thousands of applications for things for goods and services related to the metaverse. And people that are applying to register marks have found that there's often a disconnect between the appropriate category for a real good and its virtual equivalent. So take the example of shoe design. The physical good fits perfectly into Class 25, which covers clothing, footwear, headwear for human beings. A virtual representation of that physical good, but does not fit into that category. Indeed, in the US, they've gone as far as saying that they will reject applications that claim virtual goods in the class of their physical world counterparts. A recent case involving Yuga Labs is quite useful. They applied for a mark, for the mark BAKC for digital collectibles sold as NFTs. And they applied for that in class 16, class 16 being the class for physical paper collectibles, such as trading cards. The USPTO said, no, you can't do that. Instead, you have to register that in class 9 if you want it to cover the digital version. So the current favoured approach of both in the US, in the EU, and in the UK, when you're applying for registrations for metaverse-related marks, is to use the categories on the slide as a sort of umbrella to cover everything. So you've got class 9, which we talked about, virtual goods, including those authenticated by NFTs. Class 35, which is marketplaces and exchanges for virtual goods. Class 36, which is financial exchange services related to virtual goods, cryptocurrencies, tokenization, and fractionation of physical world assets. Class 41, very important, virtual experiences. And class 42, third-party software providers and back-end blockchain coding services. But although there have been lots of metaverse-oriented trademark applications, actually comparatively few have actually got through onto registers around the world. So although that's what we're thinking is a good approach at the moment, that may change, and we just need to keep an eye on it as things develop.
So looking now at whether trademark registrations for their physical goods cover their virtual equivalents. So as Charlie discussed earlier, we currently only have one decision on this topic, coming from the US, which is Hermes and Rothschild. Hermes, the designer of luxury handbags, took artist Mason Rothschild to court for selling the virtual Meta Birkins he created as NFTs. We've got an image of that to the right for you. Hermes alleged that Rothschild was infringing the Birkin trademarks as well as other IP rights that they owned. And the judge found in favor of Hermes, stating Rothschild use of Meta Birkin as a trademark for virtual goods is an infringement of Hermes's Birkin trademark. So the court actually went even further to suggest that had Rothschild created virtual handbags, for instance, for avatars within the metaverse, and not simply just images of the handbags via NFTs, there would be even stronger arguments to suggest trademark infringement had taken place. This decision was really welcome to brand owners for fear of metaverse trademark squatting taking place. So a kind of free-for-all where brands are set to race into the virtual world to stake out their IP, to stop individuals from profiting from their goodwill in their physical products. So it's not just Hermes that are currently encountering problems like this. A number of luxury brands are also experiencing similar issues. So Prada and Gucci have both already experienced metaverse trademark squatters trying to profit from their existing goodwill. And the issue is not, I mean, obviously Hermes and Rothschild has been really beneficial for brand owners, but it's not just this that's problematic. Because brand owners are still subject to kind of the expense of looking for these marks and the legal fees and drain on corporate resources and kind of monitoring these potential registrations that are occurring.
So in terms of counterfeits in the metaverse, although whilst the metaverse provides brands with the opportunity to sell a new host of virtual and physical products, it then therefore comes, it's a new digital form for counterfeiters to do the same. As many of you are already aware, the development of the internet has significantly increased counterfeiters' ability to sell their products via easy means and through lots of channels in the digital world. The metaverse is going to make this problem worse. Brand owners need to be forward-thinking in their anti-counterfeiting investigations and enforcements to consider how the emerging platforms are going to basically open the gates to fakes. It's likely the metaverse can open a whole new can of worms in terms of how counterfeiters operate as well. And that's why we need to be thinking about things like trademarks and brands, as we have talked about already. Platforms themselves are already considering the introduction of enforcement measures. Roblox have filed a patent application for methods to detect counterfeit virtual 3D objects. And we expect other platforms are going to do similar as time goes on. One ray of hope when considering the kind of future of brand enforcement within the metaverse is its desire and emphasis on interoperability. So that concept that we discussed earlier of all the metaverse platforms being accessible as one. Because of this focus, we're already seeing a number of the major players come together
So for instance, the Metaverse Standard Forum was set up last year. The forum includes all the big players. So we've got Meta, Microsoft, Epic Games, Adobe, and Sony. This is good for brand owners in the sense that the rules of the metaverse are being written now. So unlike its counterpart, the internet, where often regulation is kind of far behind the wild west of the reality, this could hopefully provide a unique opportunity for brand owners to kind of get their voices heard from the offset during this important initial growth stage of the metaverse. And then finally, just looking at brand promotions and advertising within the metaverse. So obviously, given the significant investment by players such as Meta, we can see that the metaverse does offer huge advertising possibilities. And we're already seeing brands exploit this. So Gucci, through its collaboration with Roblox, actually gave players the opportunity to win a digital version of their Gucci Dionysus bag, which is on the right here. It was not an NFT, it was purely for use within the game Roblox. And in 2021, it was interestingly resold, fetching $4,115 US. Now, interestingly, the physical version of this bag actually retails for $3,400 US. So there's a bit of a comparison there between the virtual and the physical counterpart. But we just wanted to say not to get caught out in thinking that the metaverse is a new area that won't be regulated, as I just discussed earlier. Already we're seeing regulation and guidance being published. For instance, last year, the Committee of Advertising Practice, CAP, published guidance on the metaverse. And as ever, we would always advise businesses to basically be as clear as possible when distinguishing between these kind of consumer experiences and advertising, and make that really clear to the consumer, whether that be on the metaverse or not.
Cool. So hopefully you found some or all of this session insightful and or interesting. We've got some key takeaways there for you. So obviously the metaverse is a parallel online world. It does not exist yet as it was envisioned, but it is still developing despite the setbacks it's had. Enforcing brands is going to be harder than ever in the metaverse because of jurisdictional boundaries, and brands should not assume that existing protection for physical goods carries into the metaverse. Instead, they need to ensure they have coverage for both physical and digital versions of their goods and services. And that's something they need to be thinking about now, not when things go wrong in 5 years' time, which is always the advice from a brand's lawyer, but it's true. So those are our takeaways. That brings us to the end of the webinar. We have run pretty much bang on time. Congratulations to you all. If you've got any questions, do type them into the Q&A box and we will try to answer them. I can see we do actually have a few already. So the first one, has the growth of AI affected the development of the metaverse? In a word, I would say yes, because obviously the tech sphere is full of bubbles that burst all the time, and it's possible that that is what's going on with the metaverse. But AI is definitely the sort of hot topic at the moment because it has enormous potential uses in all walks of life, and including within the metaverse. So I think at the moment people are definitely, as we saw with Meta, they are focusing much more on AI than they are on the metaverse. Maybe when legislation comes in on AI, if governments do get ahead of it and start restricting its use, then maybe people will switch a bit more back to the metaverse. But I think at the moment, although the metaverse will continue to develop, it will be in parallel with AI as that storms ahead, I think. Lucy, have you got?
Yeah. Okay, there's one here. So given how quickly the metaverse has faded in the last year, do you think it will remain relevant next year? And if it does fail, why should brands keep investing in its protection or their promotion in the metaverse? It's an interesting point. I guess as Charlie just said there are a lot of bubbles that burst within these kind of technological developments. And I think that doesn't mean that brands shouldn't stay proactive and on top of these kind of things. Even if you look at some of the big players just this year, so Apple did release their VR headset this year, although that might not mean it's used for the metaverse as it was envisaged by Meta, it might still be used, and VR is probably likely to become a real manifestation in our future. And because of that, I think it's still really important for brands to look at their kind of enforcement and their protection within these kind of virtual worlds, even if that's not as we envisage in the metaverse.
I've got another one, a conceptual question. Will the metaverse ever exist in its sort of its full form? Again, in a word, no. I think there are too many competing interests that would need to converge for there to be this sort of utopian metaverse that everyone works together and there's one single platform you go into and that's it. I know obviously we have the internet, which sort of is like that, but I think this is slightly different because it's much more driven by individual commercial interests. I think what we'll end up with is lots of mini metaverses where certain companies and businesses do collaborate and come together, but to create their own sort of bubble, but there will not be one single platform that is the metaverse as envisioned in fiction and by Mr. Zuckerberg. I think that's all the questions we've got at the moment. So we can wrap up and give you 4 minutes of your lives back. Thank you very much for attending. I hope you did get something out of that. If you see us at any of the other Leeds Digital Festival events, please do say hello. I'm very tall, so it's not hard to see me. You're also going to be asked some feedback questions at the end. Please do fill them out because they're helpful for us to know how we can gear content going forward. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your Friday. Thank you very much.